Let's start here. This is the administration interface for Microsoft's Azure Cloud Platform. I'm logged into this interface under my identity, and I want to give you just a bit of a sense of how important these sort of facilities are. Administration interfaces like this are normally publicly facing. Anyone with an internet connection can access it. Let's take just a few minutes to talk about some of the damage that can be done if an attacker gets hold of an administration interface like this one here. So for example, they could start to have a look at all the services that I'm running under my cloud account. Services such as websites, or as Azure calls them, app services. They'd be able to drill down and have a look at some of the individual websites I'm running. Websites such as Hack Yourself First. Now this is a website that I've used in many of my different Pluralsight courses. It's a deliberately vulnerable website that I use to demonstrate typical web security risks. It runs up here in Azure, and were an attacker able to compromise my administration facilities, this is what they'd be able to see. But perhaps more importantly, they'd be able to see things like my app settings. These are all available via the portal because as that infrastructure is virtualized and abstracted away into this thing that we now call the cloud, and in fact in this particular case we're looking at a platform as a service implementation of a website, all of the administration facilities are readily accessible in the browser. So for example, as we scroll down through my application settings, we'll see some name value pairs here, actual app settings. And very frequently app settings will have secrets in them. Now I've just put a little example in here, an app setting called my secret and a value called this is a secret value. However, very often we'd be looking at things like API keys, credentials, other secrets that are meant to remain secret and not be accessible to an attacker. Another good example of that is down just a little bit further, the connection strings. This gets you access to the database. These are my real connection strings in this particular web application. And as you can see, Azure by default has hidden them for security reasons. But an attacker with access to my administration facility would be able to take that connection string, make a connection to the database, and extract any data that the account and the connection string had access to. Along with accessing things like my app settings and my connection strings in here, an attacker could access all sorts of other cloud constructs that I might be using. So for example, I use Azure's storage implementations, blob storage, table storage, message queues. All of that is accessible when you have access to the portal. Accessing information that I already have in the portal is one particular class of attack, and certainly that is the thing that most people are most worried about. But an attacker can also do damage by doing something like this. Let's go and add a new resource under this account. And we might just go and add a virtual machine. We'll choose the latest available version of Windows Server, and we'll jump down to actually create that machine. Now I'll just drop some sample values in here because it's the next screen that I really want to show you. So those ones will be okay. Let's now click OK. And now I'm going to choose the machine size that I'd like to create. Let's go and see all the ones that are available. Now let's say, with my attacker hat on, I decide to scroll down until I find just the right machine to create for my target. A GS5 machine sounds about just right. Why is this right? Well, because it's going to cost the person who owns the cloud service over $8,000 a month. This is a different class of malice altogether. This isn't about taking my data, although certainly if they have access to the portal, that's one of the things they could do. But this is about causing me economic duress. We're going to look at something very similar shortly, which is economic denial of sustainability. But one of the risks that is run with a portal like this, and indeed all the cloud providers do have publicly facing portals like this, is that it is exceptionally easy for costs to escalate. We could spend a lot more money than just $8,000 a month, very, very simply. So from a cloud computing risks perspective, one very tangible risk is that costs can escalate out of control enormously quickly, whether that be because an attacker goes through and provisions a machine like this, or even because the individuals responsible for managing the resources over-provision or simply make a mistake and choose the wrong-sized resource. We didn't have this problem when we were ordering physical infrastructure and having it shipped on site. We had many other problems, no doubt about it, but we really didn't have the same problem of someone going in and ordering up infrastructure that causes a huge cost to be incurred almost instantaneously as they're in there in the portal. Administration facilities like this are extremely valuable. And later on in the course, I'm going to talk about how to harden the cloud. And one of the things we'll look at is how we make sure that this particular resource is as well protected as it can possibly be. For now though, let's have a look at a few of the different ways that an attacker might actually gain access to the administration facility. Let's talk about just some of the ways that an attacker can gain access to an administration facility, and then of course access private information or run up your costs. So for example, if someone with access to the administration facility reuses their credentials, those credentials may be compromised from another service. Certainly we see this happen many times with data breaches, and then reused to access the administration facility of the cloud provider. So in a case like this, the username and the password to a portal such as Microsoft's is literally obtained by the attacker and then reused in the administration facility. In a case like this, there's clearly fault on behalf of the person who owns the account. Another possible attack is something like session hijacking. Now this is quite different because what we're talking about here is what would often boil down to a flaw in the administration facility software. So for example, if they weren't flagging their cookies as HTTP only, and they had a reflected cross-site scripting vulnerability and an attacker was able to convince the victim to follow a link, we could have a case of session hijacking. I have an entire course on Pluralsight called Ethical Hacking Session Hijacking, and that goes through many of the different ways that this can happen. The reason why I've included it here is that this demonstrates that there can be weaknesses in the administration facility itself which leads to a compromise. Now this is important because it recognizes that those with access to the portal could do everything right, and that ultimately these portals themselves are just more web software that can have typical web vulnerabilities. A different risk again is exposed keys. And what I'd like to do here is actually give you an example of where this happened. Let me show you. In 2015, a web developer accidentally made a GitHub repository public. The background is that Visual Studio 2015 behaved in an unexpected fashion when he attempted to create the repository. But be that as it may, he ended up with this repository going public. The repository included an AWS key, and that key was very quickly stolen by someone monitoring GitHub for public repositories and used to provision resources that allowed the attacker to mine Bitcoins. Now very quickly he saw his bill run up to $6,500 within hours, which speaks to the previous point I just showed you in terms of how easy it is to provision very expensive resources. All of this was possible because this AWS administration facility, just like Microsoft Azure's and just like so many other cloud provider dashboards, sits out there facing the public. It is literally one key or one set of credentials away from an attacker having full control of it. So that's exposed keys. Let's go back and look at one more possible cause of administration facility compromise. Social engineering. This is another topic which I have an entire course on, Ethical Hacking Social Engineering. And in there I talk about many different ways that valuable pieces of information can be extracted from targets. In the context of gaining access to an administration facility, That target could be the individual whose account an attacker wants access to. But it also could be someone on the support side of the cloud service itself. Let's move on and take a better look at social engineering, because in the context of administration facilities of cloud services, it's a really important topic to be aware of.